All right. Yeah.
The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello and welcome to OutsourceXtra. It's Thursday, March 28th, 2013. I'm Outsource Editor Jamie Liddell, and with me in the studio, as always, is Outsource's publisher, Al Tepper. In a few minutes, I'll introduce our guest for today. Please remember that, as usual, this is intended to be a very interactive webinar, so feel free to send us and our guest any questions or thoughts via the chat or question function on your webinar interface. This week, the spring 2013 issue of Outsource went to press. I gave a précis of some of the content last week, so I'm not going to repeat myself, but suffice it to say, and obviously very humbly, I think this is our best ever issue. I'm really looking forward to your feedback, which you can send me as always on jamie.liddell@outsourcemagazine.co.uk. If you're not already a print subscriber, it is unfortunately now too late to get mailed a copy. However, if you register for our Outsource Express newsletter on the homepage at outsourcemagazine.co.uk, you can access a digital copy when we release that next week. Along with the print content that we've been putting together, we've had some really great online content on the website this week. I thought I'd draw your attention to one piece in particular, the article entitled Outsourcing and the Rebirth of Ireland PLC by Saeed Ordibehest, which I published on Tuesday. Saeed makes the claim for outsourcing as a growth engine for Ireland, following some of its worst years economically speaking for decades, in a call to arms which I found both realistic and quite inspirational actually. He writes, "For Irish businesses to compete internationally, many more will be forced to outsource what are now considered as commodity activities. Ireland has built an economy based on providing high-caliber experts with customer service culture and, of course, low corporate tax to large internationals. These will continue to see the economy through the storm, but to build a sustainable economy, the Irish people and organisations need to believe in Ireland and invest into the country. We need more entrepreneurial organisations such as RealX and VoiceSage, who become international beacons providing first-class technology and white-label service solutions as far up the value chain as possible. It's hard to overestimate the cathartic impact the current recession has had on Ireland's private sector. While the early confidence of the late 90s may have returned, the legacy of the boom years still impedes much industry in the domestic economy. The very phrase Celtic Tiger haunts the Irish economy like a sneering ghost, but that cannot be allowed to hold back future business growth. Strong fundamentals are in place, but a bright future will see more outsourcing by Ireland's firms and more of Ireland's enterprises providing services to clients across the globe." So I wanted to see firstly what you think of that thesis in itself, so please do let me know on this webinar via the chat or website or question function. And to ask if any of you might be able to comment on the Irish market, whether as buy or sell side or advisory, for a forthcoming print article. In which case, please do drop me a line. My address, once again, is jamie.liddell@outsourcemagazine.co.uk. Talking of forthcoming print articles, anyone with expertise in any of the following topics is invited to get in touch if they'd like to share their learnings with the Outsource readership: UK healthcare outsourcing, facilities management, information security following an outsourcing, and RPO. Obviously, that is only a small selection of the articles we've got coming up, but we'd look at other topics down the line. Please do get in touch, especially if you're buy side, if you'd like to share your thoughts. Okay, it's time to introduce our special guest for this week. It's Guy Strafford, Chief Client Officer at Proxima Group, the procurement outsourcing specialists. Guy, welcome.
Hi, thank you.
Guy, it sounds like you've got quite a bit of feedback going on there, so if we can try and kind of moderate that at any point, that would be great. Technical issues being a speciality of OutsourceXtra, of course. Once again, audience can send Guy any questions you may have via the chat or question function on the webinar interface. Please do keep them coming throughout the interview, and we'll try to get through as many of them as possible. Guy, so to kick off, obviously we're looking at what remains globally a pretty tricky business environment generally. Firstly, I mean, what are your thoughts, economically speaking, on the situation we find ourselves in right now?
First, good afternoon. Sorry about that sort of the Doctor Who type moment, I think, where with all the feedback. So I think in terms of the economy at the moment, it's no one's great surprise. It remains a tough situation. I think what's interesting in terms of how it affects what we're going to end up talking about is probably at two levels. There's a short-term macro problem and there's a larger macro one, both of which feed into the procurement world. The short-term issue is it's not that we live in a world of low growth, but it's we live in a world of low growth and low inflation. So the nominal economy, which is the sort of combination of both, when you add both inflation numbers and the growth numbers together, the nominal economy is not growing very fast. And I think that's one of the big limitations why top lines for a lot of businesses are under stress at the moment. because literally there isn't a growing nominal or growing actual economy that for them to operate in. The second is that there's this broader macro trend, which is we live in more open economies than we ever did before. So if you think over the last 20 years how you've had trade liberalization, 40 years ago we started having currency liberalization, and then you've got the internet and logistics markets have revolutionized not just the availability of products, but the second thing is your ability to access and sell those, access to the products themselves and sell those products means suddenly that marketplaces that previously weren't viable or you could never have got to, you can now get to, and that just means that for every product being made, it is easier to sell it and easier to buy than ever it was before, and I think that just makes the world more competitive.
Well, I guess it's certainly made it more competitive within the consumer landscape, and I mean, obviously prices have been kept particularly low for a long time through a degree of financial manipulation on a macro level. I mean, how is that kind of impacting upon the sort of people that you do business with specifically? I know you don't necessarily have a target sector as such, but how's that impacting upon your clients, for example?
Well, I think these macro and micro forces, so the micro forces of the last few years, the macro one of the last, as I said, 20 years or more, I think is progressively really beginning to have an impact on management practice and management thinking about the nature of how you develop and grow a business. Because I see lots of different organizations. I think at certain times in a business's cycle, you've had management cadres very focused on top line, managing top line growth, driving the business through that sales engine, and then hoping that the operation sort of keeps up with the pace of evolution. In a world where it's just tougher to do that, and you have to fight for your growth and you have to fight for the profitability, I think the demands on management are more broad-based now in terms of having to also have the ability to make sure that their operational capability is suitable for the nature of the organization that they're running now. And operations are getting more complicated, particularly as organizations globalize.
I know we're going to have a look in a bit about some of the differences and similarities with other outsourcing practices, but obviously a lot of things run through an organization that's looking to outsource or has outsourced in terms of the sort of skill sets required, doesn't it? At the management level, you're looking at certain specific skills required, certainly in the retained team. Are you finding that those skills and that management capability is in place right now, or do you feel there's still a bit of a deficit there? Obviously, the implication of what you've been saying is that there's still quite a bit of work still to be done.
I think procurement generally is a relatively immature profession, for want of a description. I say this, I'm a chartered accountant as well, so I have sort of crossed over two professions in my career. Procurement is much younger. There's more development to be done in terms of itself, and also I think there's the broader changes. I mean, I think there's some research that we've done that others have picked up on. And, businesses themselves are going through quite a process of structural change as well. So the business of the Karl Marx envisaged 130 years ago of a business essentially being a factory, a few workers, and some sort of owner with a bit of capital, has been replaced by the Apples of this world, who have got a small core of personnel that work in the business, but most of the manufacturing now, if not all of the manufacturing, in fact, is done externally. And that trend of externalization, where more and more, in fact, of businesses' activities are being dealt with by suppliers, is why your magazine exists, if you think about it. I mean, the clue's in the title. But it also means that there's a full obligation on management to adapt its techniques to deal with a world where, it doesn't matter whether it is horse meat or it doesn't matter whether it's oil rigs in the Gulf of Mexico, that businesses have got to adapt to the fact that a lot of the operational risks, a lot of the strategic challenges, a lot of the opportunity in terms of improving employee productivity now exist in how you deploy suppliers. And that just demands a different toolkit to the toolkit that has been in place hitherto. And I think businesses are adapting to it. Yeah, and the fact, I've given two examples of where businesses, two instances where businesses have had challenges in adapting to it. You could take the Japanese tsunami. There's a whole bunch of other examples that one could take, where I think there's a process of catch-up to be done, both by the management community and also, in this instance, I think by procurement and supply chain, to step up to the bat that in your average large business now, in effect, 5/6 of their operating activities are undertaken by suppliers.
Well, what do these sort of developments mean for you guys then, specifically as a procurement outsourcer?
I think that what is happening, I mean, we are going through a good phase of growth, and I think there seems to be rising demand for what it is that we do, and I think I get some corresponding anecdotal feedback that some of the other people in the marketplace are in a similar situation. I think what it means for us is sort of a combination of, there's going to be higher demand for organizations, from our organizations saying, we need to sort this out, and we are operating in a world where our business is getting more complicated. If we want to do what we want to do, we need more and more and more suppliers who specialize to provide those services to help us operate as a business. That requires a breadth of capability and an infrastructure and specialization that we don't have at the moment. And they've either got to decide to make that or build it. And I think particularly in the world that we inhabit, which is predominantly the sourcing of what some people call non-core, some people call indirect goods and services, the marketing, the professional services, the property, the IT, etc. Its sheer diversity means that there's going to be a community of organizations who just say, well, we don't want to build that ourselves. We can never have the skill set internally to cover it all, be up to speed with it in the way that we'd like. And if we're going to focus on our core activity, the implication is we've got to get the specialists in to do the non-core piece.
So in a sense, you're talking about procurement, a procurement outsourcing provider as yourself, being a kind of sort of systems integrator in a sense, and kind of drawing all those different aspects of the service delivery engagement together in one kind of hands-off model.
I think it's certainly it's an interesting use of the word whether we're a systems integrator, or I think there are certainly a lot of different processes that come together when you're doing procurement outsourcing. So just to be clear, I'm not talking about operations of procure-to-pay type platform, the conventional accounts payable type narrative here. For the purpose of this discussion, one's talking predominantly about actual, some people call strategic sourcing, other people use the term, broadest term, procurement. And ultimately it is the process of persuading stakeholders to influencing stakeholders, changing what they want, defining that need, taking that need to market, and then managing the stakeholder and suppliers afterwards. And I think that there continues to be significant opportunity for organizations like us to take advantage of that. Whether it's systems integration, I think systems are important to this, and infrastructure is important. The management of intellectual property, the IP, the pricing, all the sort of information that we manage is critical. But I think that possibly one of the key differentiations is the extent to which the role of the procurement outsourcer has a very heavy advisory quality to it, because ultimately a lot of the time the decision maker remains the client. What we're trying to do is help the client make a smarter choice, and a lot of that means that there is a people aspect to it, that if you want to make the marketing director change fundamentally how he's going about engaging with his suppliers, he wants to do that face-to-face with someone he trusts and respects for their insights, etc. And that means that the systems have got to operate to feed that individual to help them provide insight.
We'll come back to that in a sec. There's a lot to pick up on there. I think it's probably about time we turn to some questions from the audience. So, Al, I believe you've got a couple teed up there.
Yes, Kieran wants to know what are the obstacles you usually find when pitching a procurement outsourcing solution?
So looking for some deep insight from the coalface there, I think. How's your pitching process?
That's a good question. I think procurement outsourcing is relatively immature compared to the FNA space, for example. So I think there are two big options. One is that for a lot of management, procurement doesn't remain a priority. Whether I personally can disagree with that, but I mean I have to face the realities. So one is persuading them that it is important enough. The second thing is once they've made that decision, probably the main comparator is at the moment most organizations have got an internal procurement function of their own, and so I think the difference is, or the main obstacle is it needs to be clear to whoever is buying this that the outcome that is going to come from going external is going to be in some way, shape, or form dramatically different to what there is from the internal capability. And one of the problems is most businesses, in fact, almost every business I've ever engaged with, they underinvest in their procurement capability because what has happened is the supply base has grown and grown and grown, and their operational capability within procurement hasn't kept up with that growth. There is organizations that are under-resourced. So in order to get best practice, what they need to do is be prepared to invest more. So the classic model of, I'm stereotyping slightly, an FNA outsource where they're spending 10 million and their proposition is go offshore, re-engineer it, and you can now spend 7.5. In procurement outsourcing, you're probably going to an organization and saying, you are spending 2, we now want you to spend 4, but you're going to get a dramatically different outcome as a result. And I think that requires a slightly different mindset in terms of selling it, in terms of the approach that one needs to take.
Okay, I think you've probably covered, by the look of it, a little bit of the possible answer to the second one. But Al, you've got another one lined up there, I think.
Yes, Annie asks or says, you said procurement is an immature profession. Can you expand on this, please?
I think someone's going to correct me on the dates, but I think there's a guy called Pacholi who developed debits and credits in 1490. Okay, so that, by my reckoning, the accountants had been going for about 530 years in terms of sort of their thinking, their developing. So if you ever read, say, an accounting magazine, the things they're worrying about are treatment of obscure derivatives in the banking industry. Okay. It's really quite specialist, minute stuff. The second thing is the accounting profession has split into chunks. So there are people who do management accounting, people who do auditing, people who do public sector accounting, people who do certified accounting, people who do tax accounting, etc. I think the procurement profession, by comparison, just want to take the two comparisons, I think the procurement profession has not gone through that level of specialization yet. And the issues that it's grappling with are still really quite big or major, that there are arguments about how to do it, what best practice looks like, rather than worrying about the sort of stuff at the margin. And I think that suggests to me that an organization that if it's at that stage of its maturity where it's still addressing those sorts of issues, that makes it almost like a teenage organization, so a teenage profession. So some of the members, participants are close to adulthood, some are just beyond childhood, and it's finding its way, it's feeling its way to the answers to some of the profound questions of life.
Okay, well, hopefully that's answered Annie's question very fully and also slightly poetically towards the end there, so thank you very much for that, Guy. I mean, looking at comparisons with other activities and other professions, obviously procurement outsourcing specifically sits within or beneath a kind of broader outsourcing umbrella, but doesn't necessarily conform to some of the same rules. I mean, how closely do you think procurement outsourcing is going to follow the same path as, for example, FNA BPO or maybe ITO?
That's a challenging question in as much as, if I peer into the crystal ball, I suspect that the answer is going to be different in some ways, in as much as there's a couple of key things just to reflect on. So one is procurement outsourcing isn't about a labor arbitrage. essentially certainly the stuff that the end of the spectrum that we are at, as I said, which is not running procure sort of accounts payable type functions, it's not transactional in that sense. There aren't lots of employees in the organization who can be either lifted and shifted or rationalized in some way, shape, or form. So you're not trying to either take less for less or trying to simplify or reduce the costs of operating what you have today. The purpose, as far as I can see in procurement outsourcing, is essentially to say, well, we spend £1 billion or $1 billion or €1 billion with suppliers. How do we make that £900 million euros or dollars? And because the motivations are different, because the solutions look different, and I suggested that there's more of a people aspect to it in terms of interaction, face-to-face interaction, if you want, influencing and using almost consultative skills rather than transactional, repetitive skills. I think that's going to take it on a different trajectory in terms of where it goes and where it may end up.
So you think there's a sort of categorical differences there, and I mean, surely there are a few similarities in terms of, for example, even operating within the outsourcing community. We see you guys and some of your competitors at broader outsourcing events. So there is a degree of homogeneity perhaps within the outsourcing space itself.
I'm slightly overstating probably some of the differences to clarify the point. I mean, there are aspects of an FAO or an ITO that require judgment and interaction, etc. Of course, but at its heart, the fundamental business model and the rationale for doing it in most organizations is not to reduce the costs of running procurement function. It is to improve the outcomes that you get from suppliers, and I think that is quite a difference of emphasis and approach, and it doesn't lend itself to so much to offshoring or nearshoring or reshoring, whatever the phrase might be. Because the drivers in that operating reality are different, I suspect it's going to take a different path, different trajectory in some way, shape, or form. I mean, the other thing is, because there aren't thousands of people in procurement functions, or because I suggested earlier that the functions are generally under-resourced, if anything, you're probably not necessarily going to see huge deal sizes in the way that some of the early FAOs, etc., were, or the ITOs in particular have been. And so I suspect it will never get to be the size of the IT outsourcing market or anything like that.
It's funny that you pick up on the idea of it as a transformation rather than a cost saving, because of course cost saving continues to lie at the heart of most of the outsourcing that we see, certainly from the perspective of outsourcing. But so much of what's being touted about as outsourcing 3.0 or the next way of outsourcing or the value-added stuff is conforming really to what you're describing as the modus operandi of procurement outsourcing in terms of getting that transformational benefit and in terms of kind of moving up the value chain. I mean, do you feel that there's a point at which sort of traditional, if you like, BPO is going to start learning from the procurement outsourcing sphere, even though it might be a much less mature space?
I think that I'll try and clarify, just to make sure I was clear. Stage one, with regard to cost reduction, I think the point that I'm essentially trying to make is that whilst a component of the FAO and ITO market, for example, has been around saying we have got a function here, it costs X. Can we reduce the cost of that to X minus and still deliver an improved service and cover investments in systems and infrastructure, et cetera, and generate improvement in profitability that way? I think the point that I'm trying to make about procurement is if the function costs X, a procurement outsourcing might mean you end up costing 2X, but the benefits are that you now save many multiples of that because you're going to spend less money with your suppliers. And that, for some organizations, is the reason why they engage in something like a procurement outsource, because they want to take that cost out of their own organization. I think there's certainly a journey that is undertaken, which is that actually nobody buys something per se because it's cheap. You buy thing because you need it, okay, to do something else. And I think there is, part of the transformation journey is going to be progressively helping organizations get smarter at how they define what their needs are, how they define what they really want, they need to buy, and then being as smart as you can be at actually driving the value from the supply community to purchase it. Whether that's a lesson from outsourcing 3.0 is, and then whether there's analogy, is a good question. I mean, I think outsourcing, let's assume if say general outsourcing is 15 years ahead in its evolution compared to procurement outsourcing, and I make the date up a bit. I mean, it's just more mature. It's been through more deal cycles, and so the classic dynamic, which was the easy low-hanging fruit, have been taken. So I think if clients are looking now more to drive value because in other ways, because the simple cost arbitrages have all gone. So there's more of a differentiation between in terms of delivery and outcome. And in that sense, I think that might be, that output orientation probably is analogous to where I think procurement outsourcing has gone straight into. How procurement outsourcing will evolve 10, 15 years down the line when it's more mature, time will tell.
Well, we are absolutely confident that you guys will be at the heart of it as well, so we're looking forward to seeing how things pan out. Guy, it's been great talking to you. Sorry, we're going to have to bring things to a close, but obviously time is a factor. Any of the other questions that we have from the audience, I will make sure I pass over to Guy, and hopefully he'll be able to get back to you over the next few days. Guy, thank you very much. It's been a real pleasure.
Happy Easter.
And anyone who wants to connect with Guy following that can obviously look him up on LinkedIn or write to me specifically requesting information. I will pass on your details to Guy. That's it for this week. We'll be back next week at our usual Friday slots. That's 2:30 Friday afternoon GMT, or I think we might even be on BST at that point, but 2:30 London time anyway. Meanwhile, thank you very much for joining us. And for those of you who are celebrating Easter, have a really good and relaxing break. See you next week.